afternoon and welcome to 48 University Place for the first PrinceCast of the semester. I'm Michael Medeiros and I'm here with Prince columnist Charlie Metzger. Today we'll be mainly discussing Charlie's column from last week called Crashing the Tea Party, during which he focused on New Jersey's governor, Chris Christie. So Charlie, why don't you tell us a little bit about Chris Christie's platform and why you think that he might be a model for both Democrats and Republicans?
Yeah, so Christie was elected about a year and change ago, about this time in 2009, and he replaced outgoing governor and former Senator John Corzine. And he was elected on a mandate to slash the state's budget. So last fiscal year, New Jersey faced a massive budget deficit of $10 billion, and unlike the federal government, New Jersey can't spend money it doesn't have. There's a balanced budget amendment in the state's constitution. So Christie was elected to cut the budget, and that's to a large degree what he's done, and he's done it in a very impressive way. So Christie, unlike other Republican governors, hasn't really gotten on the Tea Party bandwagon and is focused on common sense solutions. So he didn't sue the federal government over Obamacare, he accepted federal stimulus money for things like education and state health care, and really has put New Jersey back on the path to fiscal solvency, and has risen above the fray of candidates like Sharon Angle and Christine O'Donnell and Marco Rubio and Rand Paul to find really effective solutions. We can talk about that more, but that was kind of the thesis of the column.
Sure. Yeah, I was wondering, I was hoping you could elaborate on what you see as the difference between the modern, highly publicized Tea Party movement and more moderate Republicans like Chris Christie.
Yeah, so the Republican strategy in D.C., which has been fueled in large part by the Tea Party movement, has been to say no to everything that President Obama proposes. So the Republicans voted in lockstep against health care, they voted in lockstep against economic stimulus, they voted in lockstep against a whole slate, against financial regulatory reform, against most of President Obama's legislative priorities. And instead of just not paying attention to the concerns of Democrats in Princeton, Chris Christie has found a really great way of working with them. So there were two examples I cited. The first was that more or less everyone in the state has to be a fiscal conservative now, and Christie has taken on the state's unduly powerful unions to slash state education budgets, which was a step that needed to be taken, but was a pill that was really hard to swallow. And the second, and I think the best evidence of Christie's real success as a bargainer and a compromiser, is a compromise that he and state Democrats reached on a property tax increase hike cap, which basically says that local governments can't raise property taxes by more than 2% a year. But there are a lot of caveats that they wrote into the bill and into the compromise that make it a lot more sane than it would have been otherwise.
Do you think a moderate Republican like Christie has more or less cross-party appeal in the Tea Party movement, which is now getting all the publicity?
Definitely more. The Tea Party movement is anti-intellectual and it's uncompromising, and people like Rand Paul, when they get to D.C., if they're elected, probably won't do a whole lot in the way of crafting actual policy. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens when Tea Partiers get elected. More importantly, though, and this is what I find kind of disappointing, I don't think Christie has much national appeal. I don't think he'll be a contender for the presidency in 2012, and I think the appeal that he has nationally in terms of getting moderate Republicans elected is probably fairly small. I mean, one of the lines in the column was that Christie is a great example, he's a case study in how to govern a fairly democratic state as a Republican governor. The problem for Christie, though, is that his political capital will be significantly less next year when hopefully the budget deficit is less.
But why don't you think someone with a track record of cutting the deficit would have national appeal?
Well, you really have to look at who's going to vote in the 2010 and 2012 elections.
Are you looking at the general elections or the primaries?
Well, both. So, starting first with 2010, I mean, the 2010 elections are just around the corner, and Christie doesn't really have a whole lot of time in which to raise his national stature. But between now and 2012, projections about unemployment and projections about the federal budget deficit all point to a very, very slow economic recovery. And because the Tea Party in large part arose out of high unemployment and high federal budget deficits, presumably it's going to be around for a while. And the problem with someone like Christie is that cutting deals with Democrats, regardless of whether or not the end result is one that's great for everyone, as it is in New Jersey, cutting deals with Democrats doesn't endear you to the Tea Party movement. And like we saw in Delaware, it's the Tea Partiers, not moderate Republicans, who are energized to vote these days. So if that trend continues, Chris Christie's national appeal probably isn't going to go anywhere.
Especially in the primaries. What about on Princeton campus, or other college campuses? How do you think that the Tea Party movement, or the appeal of more moderate, anti-intellectual Republicans compares to the appeal that other politicians have to current college students, say Barack Obama?
So I think as the pendulum swung away from Obama and toward the Tea Party, the effect that that's had here is more to create apathy than to create energy and momentum and motivation on the other side of the spectrum. So Princeton students are unabashedly liberal. There was a poll that was taken by a company called Nassau Research in 2008 before the election, and 85% of students surveyed said that they'd be voting for Obama. So I don't think there was ever much chance that the Tea Party movement would gain traction here. But on top of that, if you compound the fact that the Tea Party movement is unabashedly and shamelessly anti-intellectual, has a real problem with the Ivy League establishment. There's a big target on Larry Summers' back. Larry Summers decided to leave the Obama administration about a week ago. So the Ivy League elite aren't the target young people that the Tea Party is focused on.
So who are the target young people? When I think of the Tea Partiers, I think of, middle-aged to older screaming white people on Fox News.
Yeah.
Are they targeting any young people? Are there universities out there where the Tea Party has a strong following?
Well, I think the big problem with the Tea Party trying to reach out to college students is that there isn't a Tea Party hierarchy. So pundits and people in the news use the term Tea Party to refer to 4 or 5 different groups with names like Tea Party Patriots, Tea Party Express. So it isn't as if you can point to one person and say, ah, yes, like Jim DeMint is the national head of the Tea Party movement. Sarah Palin is sort of the de facto head of the movement, but a big part of energizing college students is having a really strong infrastructure, is having college Democrats organizations and college Republicans organizations, and giving them money to have get-out-the-vote operations and sending them to canvass in places. I went to canvass with the college Democrats in 2008 for Obama, in the interest of full disclosure, but the Tea Party movement doesn't have the kind of apparatus that would lend itself well to energizing college students.
Interesting. Well, moving on to another topic, in recent campus news, you may have heard this week that, contrary to earlier reports, the dinky will hopefully not be going anywhere. So Charlie had previously written a column called Save the Dinky, proposing that we keep the dinky. So Charlie, why don't you tell us more about your column and why you're happy that this decision's been made?
Yeah, well, I'd like to think that in some small way I contributed to the starting of the Save the Dinky movement, and based on the meeting that was held yesterday, the local forum, the Princeton Borough Council was making a decision as to whether or not to go forward with the bus rapid transit plan or to send the dinky plan back to the subcommittee that had originated the idea of getting rid of it. And it seems like for now the dinky is here to stay because the plan to replace the dinky with a bus has been referred back to the subcommittee it came from, which is a great thing. I mean, it's terrific news for a couple of reasons. I was really encouraged that it seemed like most of the people who showed up for the meeting were pro-dinky-ers. So I think there are 3 big reasons why the dinky shouldn't be replaced and why it's a really great thing that the movement to replace it with a bus seems to have died last night. The first reason is that replacing it with a bus isn't cost-effective. It would cost $87 million or something on the order thereof, and really wouldn't save very much money in the long run. Second, the dinky is much more effective at moving large groups of people at peak hours. And finally, the idea that people would use the dinky right-of-way as a towpath or for jogging or as a link between Princeton and Princeton Junction doesn't really hold water. But anyway, in the aggregate, in the meta sense, it's a really great thing that the dinky looks as though it's going to be saved.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Charlie, and thank you for watching today's PrinceCast, and we hope you join us again next week.